Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Excel College Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Chambers, joined by co-host today, Austin Smith.
Yes, sir.
What's
Glad
up?
to be on again.
Glad to have you back. By the way, before we get started and before we introduce our other guest, which everyone already knows, hi Andrew.
Hello.
Just want to give a big shout out to the homie, Austin Smith, because he's been doing a lot of work to make this podcast happen today. So, thanks.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. If only you guys knew what went into all the behind the scenes of getting a podcast going. And big shout out to Andrea Hunter, who just lent us her camera, which is why this is on a really nice screen right now.
Yeah.
Where can we find Andrea
Shout
on
out.
Instagram for her wedding? She's a
Good question.
Andrea Marie Photography.
yeah, Andrea
Yeah.
Marie Photography.
Either way, we can maybe drop a link.
We'll drop a link in there.
Yeah.
If you're getting married soon,
Oh, yeah.
which I know some people that are, you should totally holler at Andrea because she's an incredible wedding photographer.
Oh, yeah.
So free shout out to Andrea.
She's getting booked up for 2023 right now.
Goodness, better hurry. Yeah.
So if you're liking someone, start looking her up right now.
So if you're
Far enough
dating
out.
someone and you're like,
Yeah.
maybe 2024 is a good
you go.
year.
Yeah.
Go ahead and reach out.
Put it
Yeah,
deposit down.
now's the time.
Yeah. So today we have Andrew Hawk back in the house.
Yeah.
What's up, bro?
Hello.
Good to have you.
Good to be back.
And we're going to be talking about government.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories.
Let's go.
Well, no.
okay, hot
Maybe
take.
we'll touch on those,
sorry.
but
Hot take 9/11, real or fake?
9/11 happens every year. So
Nice.
September usually
dodgy.
has
That
at
was a
least
very
11
safe
days.
answer, and I'm
Gotcha.
super impressed. I will
Yeah.
definitely vote
That's
for
more
you in
politics
midterms.
than just
Yeah.
government
Moon landing.
subtopic.
Yeah.
Moon landing. Real or fake?
We'll move on. I can't confirm or
Didn't have a
deny.
clever one for that one.
So, also exciting news: we got our Excel merch store up
Yes.
on the college website. Ha
Yeah.
and ha.
Oh.
Look at this, huh?
You guys are on it.
And we got some hoodies
Yeah.
that are fresh. I'm not gonna lie, they're fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have one.
Got a little
No, we
tagline here. You like that?
Yeah.
Got a little.
What does it say?
It says, "Build a life, not just a living."
Amazing.
Beautiful tagline.
Andy Mineo said that, and he said it in a different way. So, anyways.
Beautiful
We
life.
also, to some of our new students coming in that are getting enrolled early, we're giving them Eno hammocks with Excel logos on them.
What?
No way.
It's gonna be sick. Yeah.
We got that hooked up?
Yeah.
So if I could re-enroll, no, I'm saying-
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna be amazing.
I'll do
That's
my
amazing.
master's.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
What would it take?
So, but yeah, let's launch into government.
Yeah.
We're gonna be talking midterm. So, okay. So here's the deal. Midterm elections are coming up. By the time people hear this, they'll probably have happened. Realistically speaking, they'll have happened already. I think. Yeah, they'll have happened already. So we're not here today to talk about whether you should be Republican or Democrat, are we?
No.
I mean, although at the end, Andrew's going to tell us who he voted for last year and why.
Yeah.
So stay till the end.
Just put me on the spot.
I love
right?
being the
That's
host.
that, yeah.
No,
Putting people on blast.
I mean, I'll share my personal opinion, but
Okay,
either way,
okay.
if you want. Yeah.
which, yeah. So, and then, but today what we really want to talk about is like purpose of government, I think, and forms of government and how our current government came to be. So do you want to just give us a little intro into the government module and kind of some of the themes that we walked through, and then we're going to hone in on one,
Yeah.
which is classical liberalism. And put the word classical in front of
Disclaimer.
liberalism before you start saying, they're liberals!
Yeah. Let's talk about what that means.
Okay.
That's exactly it. So zooming out a long ways, right? So the whole core we're trying to like tie from the very start in theology, this idea of like God as ultimate reality and like wisdom being like aligning ourselves, our lives, all of the things that we create in alignment with who God is. And that gets pretty abstract in some points, but if you trace it through each of the topics, it actually breaks it down in a way that's actually beautiful. So as we're coming out of anthropology, where we're studying like mankind, great podcast if you want to go back to that one, we move into sociology, which is talking about like, how does mankind formally organize? We talked about like the desert island kind of scenario.
Oh, yeah.
So there's these basic building blocks of the ideas. So how we organize, how we stratify, like who's in this hierarchy where and why, what authority they have, where that comes from. We're kind of pushing to the end into government. And then it ends with like legal protection in society. So as we're going through each of those things, it's kind of setting you up with these base ideas of, as humans, what does it look like when we come together? So in government, it brings us up to the first week, which is biblical theism. So essentially talking about how a government over the people needs to keep its authority under God.
Under God. One nation under God.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So exactly. So there's phrases you'll hear that might kind of hyperlink over to other documents and things you've heard in like class and whatnot for years. So with that kind of sets us up for this first week of like, what does it look like for a nation to be under God? And what does that mean? And we touched on a lot of different topics. So an avoidance of getting onto rabbit trails, because I know I could. I'll go with a big summary for all the weeks here. So that was the first week. And then the next one we went into what you already mentioned, classical liberalism, talking about like, what does the word liberal mean? Where does it come from? And then kind of pulling that out into like, what did it mean back when they're writing? Writing in like 1776, right?
Yeah.
So with that, in the American government, it looks like one thing, but it comes from a longer history even before that, where they were gathering things together. So we can talk about that a lot more today, about what that looks like. And then the next one's structured federalism, which have either of you guys seen Hamilton before?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Seen,
Yeah.
heard every road trip.
Oh man, wow.
Yeah.
We got a huge Hamilton fan here. So do you remember the Federalist Papers?
Oh yeah.
He's writing those.
Yeah.
So structured federalism, this idea of what does it look like with a federal centralized government that's healthy, because all the Americans were like terrified
of centralized government.
Centralized government because of tyranny, because this abuse of power that was not for your benefit, but rather for their own. They had endured so much of it. And it came down to things like tax representation and things where these abuses were taking place. So that became really popular of how do we have a government that has enough power, but not too much, but not too little that it's ineffective to do its job. And then finally, it's on principled constitutionalism. And it's talking about keeping equality law, which reaches back to what is equality? Equality of what? In like the sociology module and even anthropology, because the word equality can be, I don't know, almost a whole different conversation, because you need to define equality of what, not necessarily equality of outcome, but maybe equality of value as a human being. And what does that look like? And how do we support people in their dignity as man, reaching back to anthropology, even if they have different giftings, in the same way that I might trust you to drive my car more than Austin if I've seen that you have a better driving record and he has like been all over the road, if I've ridden with both of you. So it doesn't mean I value you differently as human beings, but it might look different of outcome, that if he keeps wrecking his car, it might be like, well, it's not fair that Austin doesn't have a car and you do. So there's a different understanding of like what equality looks like. So equality of outcome isn't, because it might sound great to say it's great if you both have cars. It's just if you both have cars, because in America you need that. But he's been driving like crazy. It doesn't make sense to try and make an equal outcome as much as saying like Austin has the same like rights,
opportunity
of certain things. But and that's another thing. When you say opportunity for what? So with all that being said, there's a lot of semantics to go into, but these principles that you can go into really help you weed out a lot of the more nuanced conversations.
Okay.
So
I really want to go into all four of those.
I know each of them sound
just
great.
Camp on. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
a great book to read though that we started with.
Yeah.
If anyone's wanting to kind of dive into that, especially like some of those key principles and those ideas, the 5,000 year leap. That's what we started the whole first week, just really reading and getting into that. And it essentially talks about how America took all of these different ideas in this experiment, really, of these brilliant men who took a lot of time arguing out, hashing out, what do we make this thing into? A lot of disagreement. Sometimes only one person coming up with an idea, like checks and balances, where we combine these different elements of all the other governments and make it into one. That was only one person that actually said that for a long time until others came on board.
Who?
I'm pretty sure it was John Adams. I have to go back and read it. I know. But things like that, when I realized that one person was fighting for it, but it actually became something that we just take as
that is amazing.
for granted.
Actually.
I know. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So they actually learned, just in like a basic sense, I learned this especially in the 5,000 year leap, that they actually moved a lot of their sessions private before going public,
mean,
so that people could actually change their mind without the risk of embarrassment.
Wow.
And I was blown away by that. Like, imagine if people were really able to change their minds to learn something better and admit that they're human, but not just stay camped out there as though that's the only ideology.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So I thought that was amazing. That allowed for the discourse amongst people to change their minds and then bring it forward. It was just a really honoring thing.
I think it's actually crazy how much of our like founding years that we don't know about,
right?
Or that we like don't learn about. And I think it's good because we have the finished product. I mean, I say finished product, but like the Constitution that we're currently working with,
right.
and the government that we're currently working with. That's what I learned in history class, and then forward from there. Like, I didn't know there was like 10 years between independence and George Washington.
I know.
Like, he was the first president, but he wasn't the first ruler of the country. That blew my mind when I learned that. So it's just so interesting, like the way and the time period that all this stuff actually came into being, and how much work actually went into that, and how much different like versions they tried. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah.
So many. And how many things that they didn't agree on.
Yeah.
And how few. And it comes down, you can really see how few things they agreed on when you think of the, countless proposals and however many proposed, like actual proposed officially ratifications or things that weren't ratified, and the actual amount of amendments to the Constitution we have. It's very few compared to all that were put up for it. And eventually everyone was coming into agreement. So there's so many nuances, and the government, naturally, it's got so many different pieces to it, but it's actually an intentional thing. And the checks and balances, just as a core kind of principle here, like when we say bureaucracy, like if you're saying the bureaucracy, the red tape, the whatever, usually as a person, as a citizen of the nation, we're like saying it and
that's
like,
a bad thing.
bureaucracy. The DMV took me hours. It's like, why? But with that, a lot of those things that were set up almost pitted against each other were actually there so that no one actually had too much power, that tyranny would be a result. So it was just enough where when they find unity, they fly straight. They compared it to an eagle with two wings. So if one wing's stronger than the other, you're going to be flying in like a crooked line. But if they're in balance with one another, then it's actually driving it straight ahead. So really good imagery. It even made me look at like the American symbol differently, like the crest of the United States. Really great book. Covers a lot of these basic things that really helped me see government.
So 5,000 Year Leap.
The 5,000 Year Leap.
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's tap into classical liberalism.
Yeah.
Which is week 2. And again, it's just one of the 4 themes, but we're just going to hone in on one.
Yeah.
Just so we can give people a little bit of insight into what we talked about.
Can I say something first?
Oh, yes,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
So to preface classical liberalism, we talked about biblical theism, and that is actually crucial to set up the classical liberalism, because we recognize in the first week that who is the ultimate authority?
Right.
Is it man? I mean, that was like our big discussion, was like, is it a human that actually makes these calls? And to go off the 5,000 Year Leap, like all these guys, like it actually, the whole American experiment thing started with repentance. Honestly, like you're saying, is like all these guys came together, disagreed a ton, still did till the very end.
Yeah.
Honestly, where then, only a couple individuals started making amendments.
That's very true.
But they all recognized to some degree that there was a higher power, that there was something else, which of course goes back to the core and like theology and all that stuff. Of
course.
But it was really cool to kind of, they actually fought that out at the beginning.
Wow.
Right.
Was that there needs to be another check and balance that is the ultimate authority.
Wow.
Totally.
And so the whole goal of the American government was to be submitted to God. And whether we believe that is happening today or not, like that was the initial thought. And that was such a cool discussion, I thought.
Who came up with the one nation under God thing originally?
The phrase itself, I'm actually not sure.
I don't know.
I've heard rumors that it came later than that on the currency, but the idea is clearly rooted in the beginning. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm actually on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, I just wanted to preface that because I feel like that's an important thought. Like as the core is, like the way it's structured, each week leads to the next week.
Totally.
And so
It's a
to
great
recognize
preface.
there is something that's a higher authority, and that even the founders were banking on that.
Yes.
Was so important, I think.
Totally. Wow. And they talk about the morality of America. They were actually in question of whether it was actually strong enough to hold the weight of responsibility.
Yeah.
And just thinking about that I'm like, oh man, I wonder what they would say as they watch how the nation culturally is over time.
Wow.
And just what, I don't know, is being kept at bay with seemingly good ideas rooted in things that aren't reality. You're going to suffer, you know, and that's what wisdom is. It's aligning yourself with reality. And when you think of that all the way to a government, it's pretty abstract for some. But when you break it down into different smaller ideas of, I don't know, like if mankind is the ultimate authority, then that means that mankind, when they change their minds, you're like, which man is it? Yeah. Is it just one man? Okay, but who is he serving? Well, if he's just serving mankind, it's probably going to be himself, you know, like, and it would fit his ideology, you know, and I can't blame him for that. But it's up to him to be able to submit himself to God. And you can watch nation after nation throughout history, as they did, because they're all well-versed in it, and seeing there's actually something missing.
Wow.
So, and it's up to every person to sustain that level of responsibility.
Wow.
Not just one leader.
Yeah.
That was what they were most afraid of, actually. Wow.
That's actually a pretty amazing thought. Like they had the wonder of like, does the nation have like the moral mindset to be able to sustain this? Wow.
Totally.
Wow.
So
there's a gravitas to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, classical liberalism, and we built off of biblical theism. So can you give us like a little introduction into like what is, so when I hear, I mean, obviously there's a lot of baggage, I'd say, behind the word liberal, just like there's a lot of baggage behind the word conservative.
Yeah.
So what does classical liberalism actually mean?
Yeah. So the word classical is brought in because it's often misunderstood. And also the idea has developed over time to mean something that does look very different. So the word liberal, it literally has its root in the word, same root as liberty, so meaning freedom. It is an idea that is based on the protection of life as a human fundamental right, whether there is actual government or not. Locke, Hobbes, there's a lot of different philosophers and political philosophers, people that are bringing together all these ideas and these writings that all the founding fathers would have been aware of or having read, that a lot of these ideas were built out of. So with that, the two basic fundamental tenets of that are actually built on that life should be protected regardless of what anyone's saying at the time. Because we're under God, so there's an authority, a dignity to mankind that must be protected. That is the role of government as well as property.
Okay.
So if man can have property, then he can grow food. Okay. Because if you just have a right to life, we're not going to kill you, but we're going to take your crops. It's like you've effectively taken their life. Right, it's just a slower process.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So both of those things are required. A way to sustain themselves and a way to actually live are both required for any humans as a basic part of any government.
So this is like a baseline of what government should do.
Right. And they were talking about, and one of the ideas of the week is that it needs to keep the liberty of the people under contract, meaning there's an actual contract that the government is like, yes, this is our role.
Wow.
We've effectively signed that we're going to do this,
wow.
whoever's in government. Wow. And the people are like, you can govern us. We'll give you the authority to do so if you protect these fundamental rights.
Okay.
And beforehand in history, some of the best places that it actually had been, actually the idea has been embraced. It wasn't always written down. And actually when a new conqueror came in or someone came along, it was lost because the people were confused. They didn't have something to go back to because generations only maybe kept it oral. So keeping liberty under contract, this liberality to protect those two things is actually the fundamental piece of it. Okay. But a lot of the ideas have their roots in human sovereignty.
Okay.
The sovereignty of the individual, mind you, under God, but a sovereignty of an individual that I can be ruled if I give you permission to. And when a whole group of people as a nation give that to certain people, a group of people, then that is their government.
Which is an election.
Exactly.
Whoa,
exactly. So a lot of these ideas go back to ancient Greece, Rome, even probably even before, obviously, but a lot of those ideas came forward from there and were developed then. So that's kind of the basic idea of liberalism is actually to protect human rights as an individual.
Wow.
Which is the original sense of a democratic republic.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Did you get the benefits of both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the people all offer up their authority because only the people have the authority. Why? Because God gave it to all mankind.
Wow.
He delegated that out. So
Yeah.
they have the right to elect a person, but not every person has the best interests of the entire nation.
Right.
So republic actually pulls out some of the benefits of an aristocracy where there's actually a class of people that are managing funds and actually help bring in great economic prosperity. But they didn't want them to be the ones ruling it because that's gone wrong before too.
Yeah.
So in effectively avoiding tyranny, they bring the two together in a democratic republic.
Interesting.
And now we just want to say it's one or the other, and it's like, you realize why those both were there.
Because I
you know?
always hear that we're a democracy. Everyone's like,
Oh, of course.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know that we were a democratic republic until 2 years ago.
Yeah,
makes me
and that's
sound
fair.
dumb,
I mean,
probably, but-
few do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where those ideas come from. But then it progresses.
Okay.
It
So that was
progressed
level
more.
1.
Level 2, 1 and 2. Yeah. So protection of human life
Yep.
and property.
So level 1's human life. Level 2's property.
Okay. Those are the two fundamental pieces of that.
And something I want to pull out of there is essentially you're saying authority can never be taken in that; it has to be given. Is that true?
Right, without being tyrannical.
Right.
For it to be like legitimate authority.
Okay.
Yeah, and to preserve life, liberty, right, pursuit of happiness. Those ideas are like written in. They're embedded in a lot of the documentation you see. So, yeah. So then from there, it's interesting because it can create this. Like if you protect the right to private property,
Yep.
then that means that you're naturally going to want to start a business.
Yeah.
So if you're like, or might want to start a business, how about that? But as you like do that and your business grows and grows and grows and grows, you have the opportunity to do things that could be shady because you're growing in power economically.
Right.
So the government, if you do something shady, would naturally come in and be like, hey, you can't do that. If it's bad enough, like go to jail, right? So with all of that though, but as those things become large enough, an entire market might be entirely consumed by one business. And that came along with like the antitrust laws when these monopolies would rise up and you got
Right.
Rockefellers and I know these really big names that everyone's like, oh man, we need to actually limit that because it's taking from the rest of our right to maybe private property.
Wow.
So rather than, hey, government, you have the power to protect us legally because maybe they were doing something illegal,
Yeah.
already illegal. The people actually took it a step further in giving the government power under this idea. The next stage progressed to actually you can break up monopolies. So it actually imposes on, and I mean, some people might say they not care about like a monopoly, like to break up that rich person's money. They have plenty of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's still actually infringing, giving the government to infringe on someone's right
Yeah.
to
I mean, yeah.
prosperity.
Yeah.
So if they're doing something illegal, they actually can enforce that already. They don't need to add a new law, but they've given the government a new step of power.
Yeah.
And that led to the next stages of classical liberalism.
Okay. And because the fear of a monopoly is what? Like what is the fear of a monopoly?
It's a good question. We talked about that a little bit.
We did.
Davis talked about that some.
Yeah. I mean, I think then the fear was that ultimately they were going to take up the whole economy and have all the power. But it was just a fear because it was actually still prevented from tyranny. And people actually still have the purchasing power, essentially a vote for whether they want the thing or
Like,
not.
if you don't like it, don't buy from 'em.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So if you think it's immoral, if you don't want to buy their product, if you don't like it, too expensive, don't buy it.
Yeah, because it's in the people's hands. The
Exactly.
power of the people. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yep.
I want to play this out because I would have said, but what if they're the only game in town? Don't I have to buy from them? And then Davis said something about like, well, no, the market will correct itself or something.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
I think is interesting.
yeah, it is. It
I've
is
never thought
totally.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's stopping someone else from building a business
Yeah.
is usually I can't make enough money to make it work because everyone else will go somewhere else. Right. So what if you develop a better product? Or what if it's one of those things where you don't have to purchase from them, but most people, if it's just for pure utility's sake, like I just need a t-shirt, to go work in. I'm not going to go to, I'm not going to go to Zara. I'll go to Walmart, it's just one of those things where it's like, depending on the product in the market, but there's a lot of nuances to it. It doesn't actually seem that bad, but I personally think it's where a huge turn was made against maybe the first two tenets or like a specification that gave the government a level of power that I didn't necessarily see as helpful. And it plays out later on. So the fourth like stage, it kind of moves into this more equal opportunity state. So it brings back the equality.
Oh, because, okay. So can we break down, I know 1, 2, 3, but can we break down the hinge part on number 3 and then how that leads into number 4?
Yeah. Well, so the second one I have it written down here. So it's essentially a right to get started from the same place, but not necessarily the same outcome. So it's helping people get raised up. So effectively, the government has power because we gave it to them. We, meaning all people. If all people wanted a different person in America, we have a wonderful benefit that didn't exist very effectively for a long time, which was the right to vote, to peacefully overthrow, throwing air quotes, right? Yeah. But to peacefully overthrow your government every few years in every level and different varying times, so it doesn't cause too much disruption. So that's a really beautiful thing that we have that ability. So when we gave the government power to come against someone's private property, when it comes to maybe breaking up a monopoly, that gave them power beyond what maybe those two fundamental tenets were. So it's to say, what is to stop us from making a better purchase rather than going to a monopoly for something? What's to prevent us? I know there's a lot that makes it hard, but it's not. But at what cost did we give the government more power to do something that the government maybe not be good at?
Okay.
Why couldn't another organization or business, church, why couldn't people themselves gather together in any other form of organization to make something better than what the monopoly currently was?
Okay.
So that's kind of one of the ideas. And it's like, well, the government, I'll just have the government do it, is so dangerous in some ways because it doesn't mean the government's going to do well at it. And the government doesn't really shrink. Like it just continually brings in more. Yeah. And I'm not anti-government either, and neither is the school. I don't want people to think that. Yeah. It's just knowing where the proper placement of power is prevents things like tyranny and I don't know, people losing their rights.
So let me put this in an analogy form.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that I'm understanding.
Yeah.
And then if I'm not, correct me on this. So so 4 steps of classical liberalism. You got first is right to life. Second, right to property. Third is they can break up monopolies if it's infringing on someone else's property. And then fourth is the whole, say that again, like it's the
equal opportunity. If you maybe start at square one and Austin's at square 20, it's what do we need? We need to give you 19, whatever. Yeah. So.
So like, let's say we're kids on a playground and Cassidy, who's producing today, is our teacher. And so classical liberalism, so her first job on the playground is make sure we don't kill each other.
I'm running around screaming, holding a stick.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm running away from him.
You can't kill me. Okay. But also that he maintains the right to his stick is number 2. I maintain the right to my Tonka truck. You maintain the right to your Pokemon cards. Like that's stage 2. Yeah. So we all can't kill each other and we get to stay or have our property.
Stick, but
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Number 3 is, Monopoly. I got to make sure this doesn't break down here. Number 3 is Austin wants to like scoop all the rocks up with his stick so that he can like plant a flag in it and play King of the Hill. But I want rocks for my Tonka truck. So if he keeps scooping all the rocks up and I'm not getting any rocks, then
I'll sell them to you.
And he'll sell them to me at an exorbitant rate. Then Cassidy is going to be like, yo, Austin, no, you can't play with all those rocks. You have to distribute some back to the playground. But then
they're mine.
So that's level 3. Yeah, he won them. Level 4 would be he's getting some rocks, and you and I are also getting some rocks, but he's getting more rocks because his stick is better at getting rocks than your Pokemon cards and than my truck, which probably my truck would be better. But for this analogy, his stick. So then the teacher's like, hey, and then I'm like, wait, he's got more rocks than me, even though I got rocks. And the teachers and Cassidy's going to come back and say, well, Austin, you have to give Andrew Chambers and Andrew Hawk the same amount of rocks that you have. And so it's kind of like a little bit, I mean, I'm not trying to, a little bit crabs in a bucket like.
No, there's some great points in there. Yeah. Keep going. Okay. That's good.
It's socialism, essentially.
Whose rocks were they to start with?
They were
the schools?
Just resource, yeah.
So assuming that it's right next, like say that this is like some prairie school and I don't know. I'm like trying to think because there's property rights all the way through. It's really hard to remove yourself from it. So if this is on like another planet and we're playing in our little spacesuits next to the spaceship, because you know what I mean? I'm like, where can you remove yourself from so many inherent like fundamental
Yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
That like as we look through that, like it's asking the question, whose rocks were they in the first place? If they're natural land that maybe, I don't know, like it's whoever gets to
let's
them
say
first.
it's natural land, like homesteading.
Exactly. That comes back to like natural rights that were actually the fundamentals of it. So they believed, like they talked about like Hobbes and Locke. They're talking about they have this personal theory that like many adhere to, that mankind in their natural state is free.
Yeah.
So they're actually free to have the right to life and property, which is where all this is like kind of built out of. Really, all the political ideologies of today that hold any weight with anyone, all of them appeal to these things. They just have promised different ways to try and get there.
Yeah.
And some of them worked better than others. But I think it's really interesting to note that that's what everyone's actually usually going for, you know? And they're just using different rhetoric or things to get to it. But I would say that with all of that, when it comes to the level of ownership, if we prevent Austin doing that, and we both say, she has the right to do that. So she's already a teacher. She's already in a form of government right now.
Okay.
For us. So it's like there's already an inherent like authority structure of a government there.
Yeah.
And say she doesn't own the land. Say, what if it's Austin's dad's land that he donates to someone who doesn't care? Like it's just someone's land on there. So I don't know, the analogy can break down a little bit, but ultimately when it comes to like a right to have property, he might pay a fee. But if he's collecting rocks and Austin's just like a really hard worker, like I'm over here daydreaming my cards.
That's what I'm saying. You're
and you got
with
yours.
Cards and and I got a truck and I still can't get more rocks than him.
Exactly. So what's to prevent us from saying, you know what, man, like we need some rocks. Austin has all the rocks. What if there's more land out here that we can walk to and get rocks?
Yeah.
Is there an actual true limit on the resources? Are there actually more resources? We just have to go and put in work to find them. You know, there's so much, because so it brings it even over in economics. I don't want to get it's kind of fresh in my mind, but there's often more than you think.
Yeah.
To be able to make things of value with.
It's a river, not a pie.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's renewable things, there's ways to do, there's a lot there. And I'll leave that for the economics podcast. But overall, it's like if we say she didn't have the power to enforce that, and say she wasn't a teacher, say she's just an adult walking by and we gave Cass like the power to do that, then she would have the power to make a lot of other declarations, like give me your Pokemon cards, you know, eventually, like if it keeps going down that path of keep giving her more and more power. When she's just there to make sure that we have a right to like have stuff. Like if I steal it from him, then that's a problem.
Right.
You know.
So in the analogy, I mean, I would say it's a little bit of overreach for Cass to look at Austin and be like, "Yo, you got to give those guys your rocks because they need an equal." Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's step 4.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what's step 5?
Yeah. So like equal opportunity state, and these nicknames come from one of the readings that we had. This isn't necessarily all of them, and we've really zoomed in on one because there's so many directions we could go.
And we got 3 minutes before our thing cuts off. So
okay, so it moves essentially to where the government has power to hand out the candy on the playground, to hand out whatever. And if new kid comes to the school, Austin has all the rocks, I have Pokemon cards, you have that. Then they're like, oh man, well they all have something, so we need to give him one of those 3 things to get him up to speed. So new kid shows up on the block, Matthew Conlon, and he gets maybe Pokemon cards and rocks. You know,
but now Cassidy gets to say who does she
exactly. She gets to determine that, right? So it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't seem necessarily bad, but if the more and more power you give to a government who has like a certain power, it can become more and more of a problem. So
more controlling on the government side versus the people side.
Right. So the trust is that with enough people that live under the morality, like understanding of that there is a higher power we have to be accountable to, then it means that it's actually not, if it's not accumulated, or if it is accumulated anywhere, it's put in check by just as powerful of another power, checks and balances.
Right.
Then it's actually going to be able to move straight. And if both of them are kind of corrupt, then still the people get an opportunity to have that overthrow, if you will, peacefully, and say this is who it should be.
Right.
So it actually helps if the whole nation has it spread out to like, offer that value.
Interesting.
So
true.
And I think what we're saying too is like, if we historically speaking, like at least in our government, once Cassidy moves past like breaking up Austin, like Austin has all the rocks, and she starts she's not giving that power back. She's got to keep moving past that.
Right.
So she's gonna go to like, hey, you guys have to have the same amount of rocks.
Right.
And then she's going to go to like, actually, I get the resource and I get to tell you how we're going to
Yeah.
Use the resource.
And it might be out of the most genuine concern. Like a teacher might be genuinely concerned. And then it brings us to the last stage, which is where we currently live, which when you hear liberal, the fifth stage. The fifth stage, final, whatever, is the choice enhancement state, if you will, where actually we see how it's been really good for Austin to collect those rocks. In fact, we're going to actually give kids a Pokemon card for every handful of rocks they collect. And she has that power to do so.
Yeah.
So it's like one of those things where it's like, where is it coming from? Well, I have to give her one Pokemon card. He has to give her a handful of rocks, and you have to give her a piece of your Tonka truck every year for our taxes, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's all getting divvied up by other people. So
Whoa.
yeah, so it has nothing to do with maybe the amount of like work put in, but rather to get equal outcome, not equal value of a person.
Wow. So, okay, so you're talking about choice enhancement as the fifth step.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the government incentivizing you to make certain choices because the government believes that those choices are best.
Right.
Which is not a bad thing. It's not
Totally.
Actually, it's conceptually a good thing. Conceptually, I think. And even the tax code is actually written this way because you'll notice like you get tax cuts or more taxes based on certain like actions or based on certain. So, for example, like capital gains tax, like if you hold a stock for more than 1 year, you have no capital gains tax on, or you have reduced capital gains tax. I think it's like 2% or something. Versus like if you actually sell it within a year, it gets taxed at your income tax rate.
Right.
So they're trying to encourage me to hold the stock for longer. Or like opportunity zones was something President Trump did, was he actually gave governors the right to create certain zones where they needed more private development to come in, and the developers were incentivized because they would get tax breaks. They'd be able to put like 1031 exchanges, so it essentially delayed taxes and capital gains taxes for years, and it was incentivizing them to build in that space. So I'm looking at that. I'm like, I mean, why is that a bad thing?
I know.
But let's talk.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk.
No,
about
that's
why
that's such a great question.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the question comes back all the way to philosophy. What is good? Who gets to decide that? You know, can we decide that? It comes back to the roots of classical liberalism and the sovereignty of the individual. So sovereignty typically means like all powerful. And it's like, is the individual actually all powerful or self-sustaining even? And the answer is no. But it's like how there was an element of it in the dignity of mankind as made in the image of God to have a level of authority. So it's a really difficult conversation to take it all the way to its root there. I believe its root, where it's talking about like what power does the individual have, but we should have power within each other as humanity to steward creation. That's part of the creation myth, not meaning fiction, but like the creation's Genesis account that like I adhere to as a Christian. So knowing that, believing that, moving all the way into the government kind of sphere, it's like if we give the government power, it's going to be near impossible for it to be removed. And then the real question is the government best to solve this problem?
Right.
That should be the question always asked, because there might be others that are able to do it privately as an organization. It's like, should the government have the power to enhance our choices? To enhance a choice means that you want to encourage a certain type of thing, which implies a certain basis of morality. Well, what happens when the government is the arbiter of morality?
Oh, interesting.
If you legislate morality,
Yeah.
you just make a nation full of hypocrites,
Right.
which means that you have inside people who are a certain way, but on the outside, oh, they're a totally different one. Like, look at, I'm going to do this good thing. I'm going to spend all this money on charity when you really just want to evade a tax.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
it comes in all these later on layers where it might be like, well, it might benefit the children. But could the children have been benefited where the government didn't get involved and make that incentivized to make that choice because it's on the outside? Because if it was truly something on the inside, then what's to prevent a business owner from giving to charity for like a genuine motive?
Right.
So it can create a hypocritical kind of thing, and this basis of morality is now handed to the government.
Right.
So,
Great.
yeah, there's a lot
That's
to
an
it.
amazing point. Yeah.
So it holds a lot of dangers.
Yeah.
But who's going to do it? Like, I'm not saying right now let's just overthrow all of this, because there are some things the government's holding up where it's like, actually, it would need another to come in and hold it. That hold our society in the way that it is right now. So it's difficult. It's really difficult looking for what does reform look like. But it's worth the study. And all people should have a basic literacy of it, so that when things come across to vote on, some of those foundational principles and timeless truths and things that are just like a foundation of reality, knowing how to make wise choices. That's like the whole point of the module, and why government is so important as a liberal artist, a free artist who knows how to handle liberty as a human being.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like the core is so hard to capture, even just on podcasts like these.
I know.
Because when you say the dignity of man, that's where it all starts. Like
Right.
the philosophy first, really actually theology first.
Right.
But like that whole concept is so true, like going back to the root of it. But then the dignity of man, if we have to recognize that first and foremost. If we don't, then we're already starting on the wrong foot. But then we go into sociology. It's like, okay, well then if we aren't all powerful by ourselves, then maybe we're a little bit more powerful together. And then we talked like about the family unit being like this huge portion of it.
So good.
And then it's like, okay, government, like, okay, how do we organize ourselves? So that's the question of like, is this the government's, like, should we, as the people that have the power to elect and vote, like, should we let this be the government's role or responsibility or control this one thing or these type of things?
Yeah.
Or should it be these private organizations?
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
I just think about like even the foster care system and adoption and all that stuff. It's like, where's the church and all that stuff?
Right,
Because if you go all the way back, shouldn't we be the ones, trying to take care of the orphans and the widows and stuff like that? But now government, essentially, in a way has stepped in and,
And we've entrusted them to do that. We've written off the responsibility in a lot of ways to the government. And that's why it's so hard not to give it up to like them, because it'd be like, oh, they'll take
Which
care
was
of
a
it.
great point earlier. Of like the more, like once government obtains control of something, it's hard to go back on that.
Yeah.
They're only going to keep going. So
Right.
The implications are crazy.
They're so far. Yeah. Well, and I feel like when you wire it that way, then people are no longer, so like, governmentally right now, like with what you're saying, like when the government tried to solve the issue of poverty, you have like the New Deal, you have welfare system, and it goes farther and farther and farther. Whereas I personally think the Judeo-Christian way of like caring for the poor is like, hey, don't glean everything out of your fields. Let other people come and like collect the scraps, and feed their families that way. And so I think that's why there's probably a lot of resentment towards the welfare system or towards like certain tax things, is because like you're not like giving me a choice in like how I want to give. Like, I want to be able to give, but I don't trust that you're giving in the way that I would give.
And then like you're saying, the government now is incentivizing people on how they should give.
Yeah.
And it's almost manipulating people to give for their own benefit. So it's like almost a selfish thing.
Yeah.
And
It's
complicated.
It's being built kind of off of and towards like more the deformity of man, really, which is the second week we talk about that there's something wrong. Yeah. And I don't think anyone debates that, and you might hear depravity and there's a lot, but deformity, it's saying there's something wrong. No matter all the discussions that can happen, there's something that was originally very right. In fact, it was called good, very good, right? And God himself said that. So if you would hear and want to wisely align with reality, you see man as first good, and then not as like an ultimate, infinite being, all powerful, all knowing. He's still finite. Man was not always fallen, but he was always finite, and he will continue to be, because we are dependent entirely on God for our entire existence, right? We're a contingent being. This is reaching all the way back to philosophy. So all these ideas just continually tie in, where mankind needs to admit our dependence, or we're going to keep appealing to the things that seem right, but they're totally putting out all things of godliness, and it's only at our own expense.
Right.
It will only produce more death, because he is life, and it's really hard to see. And I know it can be kind of disheartening sometimes to see the problems and like, what do we do?
Just when you said that, I just had the realization, like in the biblical storyline, the picture of like the ultimate like thing that led to the world going into chaos, or the culmination of that, was people trying to govern themselves in Babylon. Like we left, like every man was choosing what was right in his own eyes.
Totally.
And we built our own thing. And then chaos.
That's why the biblical theism is so important.
So important.
It has to be
Wow.
based off of
Wow.
there is a higher being that we have to submit to.
Wow.
Right. And and it's going to bring life because that's who he is. That's the beauty of wisdom. It's going to bring shalom, human flourishing.
And it doesn't mean
And it's
utopia.
No. Oh my word, no. Yeah, and that's the whole thing with it as well. I know, but it's
I was like, wait, let's go into that.
I know there's so many directions you could go, but at the end of the day, it's like, all right, like what choice can I make that aligns with reality as what I can control? This is what I bring it back to, the how then shall I live? Because right now I'm not in a political office or I don't know, in close circles with people even and stuff like that, you know? But there are forms of it. And I think of where you might have power and influence. And ultimately there's a lot that you can control, like your attitude, your choices that you make and who you trust, right? Those, we can all control those things. But I think it comes back to the sociology module and what you said, Austin. It's like, it is the church, totally. But I can't control the whole church.
Yeah.
There's one head for this body, right? Yeah. So if we're all listening to him, then what does that come down to in my day-to-day life is the family.
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally, it's like the kernel. It is, in my mind, like the mustard seed of the kingdom of God. In sociology, in government, in all things that mankind does with each other, it comes down to the family. Wow. Because if the family falls apart, then everything else does. It's all the small pieces. It's all the bricks that make up the whole thing, you know, the whole building. So if you can get that right, which is like totally ties into the whole point of the core, where the whole point of the practicum, the whole point of all of Excel really comes together. It's like it's about family and discipleship.
And family is both blood and spirit to me.
Yes.
And so if the church can really recognize that it should be a lot more of a family than a organization or a building. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like that spiritual family that comes together. So you have your blood family that has such an impact. And then if you gather, you know, socially together as a church, yes, you can't necessarily affect the church 3 states away from you per se, but you can do what you're doing right there in a local community with a greater, you know, a greater demographic essentially of like the founding fathers, unity over agreement. Yeah. Honestly. Yeah. Because they disagreed on a lot, but it's like, okay, well, let's set those little things aside and let's like focus on the big picture of things. Yep. Let's elect who we need to elect because we can't do it all ourselves. So we need some type of governmental structure, which by the way was one of my favorite discussions when we talked about should government or should the government have even existed like after the fall or before the fall? Wow. Remember the first week? Oh yeah. That Friday? Wow. Oh dude. That was such a fun discussion. I forgot about that one. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so just reiterating what
that's
you're saying.
So good. Yeah. That's So ultimately I think that being able to see not lose the forest for the trees, right? Like to see each thing for where they belong, how I can live, but also my greatest impact is actually through family. Yeah. And if I ever did, or anyone listening to this ever does run for office, then knowing those foundational principles allow, no matter what you come across, you can wisely approach it because you know what it's made up of. Right. And nothing's really new in the base elements, even if there's a new combination of things that hasn't existed before, like technology confronts us with some very real problems that haven't really existed as they have before. But in reality, it's like lust has always existed. The internet didn't create that, you know. These tools can become powerful for good, or they become powerful for other things, and it's up to what the humans decide to do with them. The humans. Maybe sound as though I'm not one.
You sound like the Transformer movie. They deserve humans.
Us humans. Oh, whoops. No. My secret's out.
I think for the sake of time, we should probably call it there. Yeah. But dang, that was good. That was interesting.
Yeah, and there's so much, man.
So much more, dude.
It's so good. 5,000 Year Leap, though, if you really want to dig in more, is a great book to get kind of a primer on those principles. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of the Excel College podcast. So that was the government module. Next, we have economics. We're going to have Cassidy back, and I think Andrew's going to co-host for that.
Yeah.
So it'll be the two Andrews.
Fine.
And
we still love you, man.
Austin's got bigger and better things to do, like build a creative arts program.
Yeah. Man, I'm stoked for that.
And then after that, literature, and then our students go to Italy.
Let's go.
And I'm probably going to fly to Italy for the Fine Arts podcast.
Whoa.
No, I wish.
We'll just bring the mics with us and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. Andrew and I are going to be in California, I think in October.
Yeah.
John Adams Academy, college fair over there.
Which
So-
might be past tense depending
might
on
be
when
past-
this comes out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So,
Either way.
anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. C7's here. We're in the middle of launch.
yeah.
Killing it. Everyone's got jobs. The practicum students from C6 are getting all their apprenticeships locked down. So, thanks so much for praying with us and
Seriously.
and listening. And we're cooking.
Yeah.
good.
It's been
So-
so fun. They're an incredible class.
Yeah.
They're so
Yeah.
I don't know, enthusiastic and just all in. It's so cool to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as always, check us out anywhere podcasts are found. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, those ones I can actually measure analytics. So, those are the best. And then check us out on YouTube and get some merch from the store. Get yourself a
Yeah.
t-shirt or a hoodie. It's getting cold out. Get yourself a hoodie.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Love you guys. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.